Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. You got Nick Augustine here, Business Development Coordinator with Grace Technologies. I'll let Chris introduce himself, but we are going to talk to you today about some feedback that we've received over the past few months about the impacts that our safety devices have had and some of the OSHA violations that we've noticed throughout the industry through 2023 and what companies can do to kind of prepare for that and make sure that they're sticking in compliance around different standards like NFPA 70E. So, Chris, why don't you kind of give us an outline what we're looking for?
Sure. Happy to be here, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Chris Schneck. I am our EMEA sales manager, along with our business development manager at Grace Technologies. Been with the company for about 5 years. I've learned a lot. I actually don't have an electrical background. I was in operations and supply chain previously, and now kind of spearheading the sales initiatives for Grace. Today, we're going to be talking about as Nick mentioned, the OSHA top 5 violations for 2023. We'll specifically call out the codes associated with those OSHA violations and the number of citations associated with each. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the 2024 NFPA 70E revisions, specifically as it relates to the point of work verbiage that was added for the 2024 edition. Throughout the presentation and kind of as a recap, we'll touch on kind of the integration and implementation of our PESDs, our permanent electrical safety devices. You might hear us call them PESDs. That's kind of what we reference them as, just as kind of an abbreviation. And then we'll also talk about kind of the how our Lockout Tagout devices fit into an electrical safety program within that development, documentation, and standard operating procedure at a facility. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. We will have a session at the end opening up for Q&A. But we're kind of doing a new format here at Grace. This is kind of an open podcast style format, a little more informal. Obviously, I need to kind of take off my sales hat. There will be some discussions throughout the presentation about Grace Technologies and our go-to-market products. But we're happy to answer any specific questions that come up. We do have a moderator checking those questions out in the chat. And then, at the end of the session, we'll just have a brief overview for anyone that joined in late or had something run long, and they might have missed some of the session for what Nick and I are going to be talking about today.
Yeah, it is open forum for questions, though. The whole point of this, and you'll see a theme as we go over these common OSHA violations, is clear, open communication and making sure that people understand what things are. So this industry specifically is full of acronyms. You got PESDs, AHJ, LOTO. If you don't know what someone's implying, feel free to ask. We don't want confusion in this, and we want to make sure everyone's clear in their understanding of what products are capable of and what they're intended to do and why they exist, why we're promoting them, and what the impact we've seen is.
Yep.
So I think we can crack right into it with some of the more common OSHA violations. And the most common one we see, we had, what was it down here?
So in 2023, just to give you all a frame of reference, there were a little over 2,500 violations. The top 5, obviously the split differential on those is going to vary. The first violation is energy control procedure. Energy control procedure made up, about a third of the overall violations in 2023 at 730 violations.
All right. So what does that mean? If you get violated for energy control procedure, is it your lockout tagout process, or is it not having one, or what stage is that?
Yeah, I think to kind of set the stage and get everyone on the same page, I'll read directly from kind of the OSHA code and standards. So this is energy control procedure. This is in 1910.147, subsection C, number 4. Procedures shall be developed, documented, and utilized for the control of potentially hazardous energy when employees are engaged in the activities covered by this section. So realistically, setting the stage of the problem, you're exactly right. Organizations may struggle with kind of having a clear, defined process and procedure as it relates to working on electrical equipment. And what I have found in kind of just general discussions with customers such as yourself is there's a couple of key talking points. One is there's a skilled labor shortage. Folks are coming into the industry, just graduating, are working on, say, a journeyman license or becoming a certified electrician, and their experience just isn't quite there yet. They don't know how every piece of equipment is operating or functions, and every piece of equipment is different, right? You never really know what's going on with a piece of equipment until you actually get your hands dirty and physically working on the device or the actual application. The second key talking point, and I'll pass it back to you, is, there's, I would consider it tribal knowledge, or knowledge that lives within people. They might be considered a subject matter expert or somebody that's been on the job for 10, 20, 30 years, and they have all of that information up here. Now that's great for having a subject matter expert, but in terms of scale and having a clear defined process and procedure, that's not great.
Yeah, so if you have equipment throughout your facility and one kind of generic lockout, tagout procedure, that varying equipment, you're going to have various tasks you go through.
Exactly.
So that's going to catch you, whereas you have your experienced personnel that knows when I'm in this situation, I don't follow the rules this way, or this way because of this. So we need those written out and documented and communicated to ensure that you're not getting OSHA violations on specific procedures. Is that that where you see a lot of helpful use there?
Yeah. I mean, again, it all ties back it's a full-blown initiative, right? It's a top-down, bottom-up. It doesn't matter who you are at your facility, whether you're the person that's actually performing the work or an engineering lead or a manager or a maintenance manager. Ultimately, this needs to be an initiative that the entire facility undertakes. Potentially looking at scale here, right? You talk about different equipment, different lockout, tagout procedures based on the equipment that's being operated on or the type of work that's being performed. Realistically, you want to try to have something that's easily scalable so that you can work with everyone and it's all standardized. So there are no questions. You can easily access the documents in the policies and procedures and perform the work or the task at hand.
All right. And the scalable is a big point because as we get into the next top violation, it's the theme we see is that clear communication and that training. But that is the category where the next most violations are found was the training and communication. So a lot of that, in conversations with people that are falling short in this area, we're finding that as employees are onboarded, they're trained and they're brought up to speed. But as those refreshers need to happen, as those toolbox talks and that hands-on training needs to happen biannually or annually at the minimum to keep everyone up to date, they're not able to get back around to all those positions. And then some of them aren't there the whole time, the skilled labor shortage and a lot of new employees in the workforce. So some of them aren't just making it to that second and third year in positions. So they're getting missed on that continuous education and being kept up to date on these. So Grace does a lot of work with our expert network, helping design and develop these electrical safe work programs. What do we do in the training and development? Are there recommendations that we make, or besides like the toolbox talks, or how do we keep people up to date on the procedures? And
that's a great question, Nick. So the expert network is basically consultant work. So we go to market with electrical safety devices, our Grace ports, our panel interface connectors that are great for anyone, frequently accessing a PLC or a control cabinet. We also have equipment health monitoring solutions as well, kind of identifying anomalous behavior and trying to prevent unplanned downtime. But to answer your question back on the expert network side of things, these are going to be consultants that can come in and assess your current state, basically doing an initial audit, identifying gaps or areas that could be improved, and ultimately kind of assessing. We currently deal with a very diverse workforce and a diverse industry. Everyone kind of is at a different phase of their safety journey. Some folks, don't have any electrical safety program. They just it's like the wild, wild west. They walk out, they, hear something clanging or something misaligned, and they just kind of start their troubleshooting process.
I would say they have a process. They don't have it documented for sure.
That's a good point.
Because if you ask any of these 491, I guarantee they're not going to say, yeah, we sent them out to do lockout, tagout without ever training them.
That's fair.
I mean, because they are training them, but it's not documented. It's kept up on, and it's not auditable.
Yeah.
So I know we have, for our procedures internally at Grace, we have an auditor that goes through to make sure that we're maintaining those standards.
Yep.
So is that something that can be implemented here? Is that like normally the
so I believe you're
safety?
referring to ISO 9000, which is kind of a overarching, as a manufacturer, right? You want to ensure that you're from your supply chain to production to shipping product and then post-product support, that there are clear documented processes and procedures in place. So we actually did just become ISO 9000 certified. Woohoo! That's a big deal. And that is certainly something. Yeah, we have an auditor now. That is certainly something that you can look into. Now I know it's eluding me, but there are specific things that facilities can do as well. It's specific facilities to ensure that they have clearly defined documentation and procedures, and it ties directly into OSHA and NFPA 70E. So there are different certifications that you can shoot for as a facility, just to ensure that you are keeping up to date and training your workers, whether that be kind of a refresher course for those workers that have been on the job for 10, 20, 30 years, or more in-depth training, hands-on training for the folks that are just coming out into the field fresh. Certainly, there are different avenues that you can explore. Just to real quick answer the expert network thing. So certainly we can come in, we can assess where you are, current state, help you bridge the gap to a defendable electrical safety program that is clearly documented, it's accessible, and everyone has access to it. That is defendable against OSHA and some of the outline and regulations that are outlined within NFPA 70E. So that is our expert network services. I don't know if you got a chance to listen in, but Terry Becker is a part of the expert network services. I believe he was on a webinar a couple months back.
Yeah, we had him in October going over NFPA 70E and CSA updates for the 2024 edition.
Yeah.
That is available on our YouTube channel. We have all of our webinar videos on demand, but Terry's a great speaker and people love listening to him. But he did a very informative session over the updates and the changes of wording and what that implies for different codes and standards throughout the industry. So he's one of the ones we lean on and we can help connect with. But there are a lot of companies that do training and will help you establish that electrical safe work program and a way to keep your employees safe. But that's generally all we're trying to accomplish here, is to make sure that the equipment that you guys are using, you can access and understand the equipment that's in place to do your job safely and efficiently instead of exposing hazards.
Yeah. Yep. So, and just to real quick tie back on the training and the communication piece. So I had asked Nick to attend some training. If you want to shed some insight, I believe that was a third party that we use, TPC. Mm-hmm. And that was geared more towards kind of the codes and the standards outlined within NFPA 70E. But, you know, coming fresh into the industry, I know that you also have some electrical background, but your background is also very diverse like mine. How was that? Did that help with kind of training and communication and just a general understanding of NFPA 70E and OSHA requirements?
Yeah, it was insightful. There's a lot of the acronyms, there's a lot of confusion around what words imply or how things are interpreted. And you'll find that with UL, because you can't get specific, because the more specific you are, the easier it is to get around a statement. But there's a lot of acronyms used. There's a lot of implications and interpretations that are hard to understand, and there's confusion around it. So what's clear is that people need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And one of the better stories that comes to mind is to really lay in why you need to understand the process that you're going through and why you're checking the things you're checking and the routine that you're set, and why training and documentation and rehearsal of this is very important. But there was, at a previous employment, there was a manufacturing line where it was easier to program the parts that came through if you change the station MAC address over to what matched the equipment coming through. So for years, it was you just changed it over, programmed it, changed it back, sent it out. They swapped it over, lined up the MAC addresses, and sped up that process for 3 or 4 years. Never an issue. And then they had orders go out where it was impossible to change the MAC address.
Oh, no.
And it was just working backwards through that process going, how did we not find that? How did we not know that we couldn't change that? And this operator, the station, had just on his own found out that this could speed up his procedure and make him faster piece by piece. But he didn't realize that he was now just taking out a quality check where he was part of that quality process and didn't understand why he was doing that step. Yep. So when you don't understand why you're doing a step, it's really easy to ignore the step and not understand the implications that has on the back end. So a lot of this training and a lot of what we're trying to accomplish is to make sure there's no confusion about what products are, what your task is, and where we land and how to make sure everyone's safe in that procedure.
Yep. And I mean, again, I think that really kind of ties back to a bigger shift that the industry needs to have. And that's safety. Again, it's not just the people that are performing the work. Yes, they are inherently taking on all the risk, especially when it comes to lockout, tagout, exposure to incident energy, and having a big full-blown spacesuit on. There's just a lot of risk involved. So it certainly is a bottom-up, top-down approach as well. In terms of a culture shift that's needed in this industry. And that ties back into the training and the communication piece. As we mentioned, 491 violations. That was the second biggest hitter for OSHA violations in 2023. The third violation, that would be periodic inspections.
Yeah, I forgot that one was coming up about the auditor comment.
Yeah, so again, that's the ISO 9000 certification. Now, again, you don't necessarily need that certification to be proactive about periodic inspections, right?
No, this one, again, I think it's going to be more making sure people understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then that they're doing it. Exactly. That they have the tools available, that you're watching them go through this, and that you're sure that they understand and are confident in their approach. Does that make sense? Or is there more to it?
I mean, no, I think that ties in nicely to kind of everyone's workload is jam-packed, right? Everyone has a long laundry list of things that they need to get done. And if it's not an immediate pressing issue, it's going to sit on the back burner.
Yeah. To be fair, if I've seen you do lockout, tagout procedure 1,000 times, I can see how that would get dropped off the importance of there's something more important to do than stand behind Chris for 5 minutes while
the only thing I will say is that low voltage electrical injuries are very prevalent in this industry. And that's partially the reason. Mm-hmm. I would say folks get comfortable. Folks do this countless times throughout the day. They are constantly changing something out on a piece of equipment or working on a conveyor or a belt or a motor, and they get comfortable. And that's where corners are starting to get cut. This ties into these periodic inspections where maybe you're not going around and inspecting the equipment on a regular cadence. Mm-hmm. Certainly, these are like compounding issues that, I can't stress to you enough. Yes, there's a level of comfortability as it relates to low voltage and testing and verifying a de-energized state or isolating the power, but don't be comfortable, do your checks, do your balances. I mean, again, we're talking about low voltage, so there is risk involved with that. We don't want you to cut corners. We want you to have those periodic, regularly scheduled cadences for inspecting the equipment, tying back to clear communication and training, and then having that electrical control procedure as well.
Yeah, one of the things in that training class I was in, the way it started too, and to add some perspective to this, he asked if anyone in the room had ever been shocked. You ever experienced an electrical shock?
This is a great.
And then he said, "How many of you have reported that?" And every hand
went down.
Yeah. So these are just the ones caught.
Yeah.
But again, if you forget why you're doing this procedure, until the accident happens, until somebody goes through one of these horrific exposure incidents, it's easy to forget why this is an easy to write off task, and why I've seen Chris do it 1,000 times. But it takes one distracted minute, and you can go from either not having a life to at the minimum, not being able to use your arm for quite a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
The risks can definitely range in severity. And that ties into the hierarchy of risk controls as well within NFPA 70E. So, again, I will keep this to a minimum, but a lot of our products fall within kind of the first few buckets of that risk control hierarchy. We're talking about engineering around the risk, kind of elimination of the risk. And then that third bucket, I'm drawing a blank. But generally our products fall into those first three categories. Substitution, exactly. That's why I have Nick here. He is my counterbalance to my off the wall rambling that you're experiencing right now. And so, our products are common sense products. Certainly we're not reinventing the wheel here, and they make a whole lot of sense, especially for those folks that are getting comfortable with their lockout tagout procedure. They also tie into safety and training with the addition of our PESDs, our permanent electrical safety devices. Not only will you get the added benefit of varying degrees of troubleshooting, say, for example, on our voltage indicator product. If you want to use those for visual verification of the presence of voltage. It can also help with lost leg or phase loss, stray voltage running to the ground, or even stuck blades on a disconnect. After you isolate, say a blade gets stuck. That goes for pretty much any of our voltage indication, our visual indication devices. And then we also have solutions that don't necessarily change your lockout tagout procedure. They merely act as an extension of your source voltage, and they're externally mounted. They keep the enclosure door closed. In terms of incident energy exposure and shock risk or shock hazard, we're eliminating, we're engineering around, and we're substituting. That is the last thing we want, is for you to have to suit up in high cal PPE. Now, again, we're not saying that wouldn't happen. If you have to go in and troubleshoot, we want you to be trained and be able to troubleshoot and be a qualified electrical personnel, regardless of whether or not you're using our permanent electrical safety devices or you're suiting up in high cal PPE, opening up your equipment and physically testing on the inside.
Yeah, but just like that, whether you're using our equipment, PPE, or somebody else's, you need to understand what that equipment's made for, how it's meant to be used, and be confident that you're using it correctly.
Exactly.
So then it's not fun to see a lot of fear mongering in this industry of you want to make sure that you understand the installation and use of these products, and that they're making your job safer. This isn't like a fight to get sales between anybody. What we're doing is trying to make maintenance tasks safer and smarter, more efficient, just by happenstance, but a lot safer and a lot smarter approach. And by keeping that incident energy from being exposed is the most obvious way to go about that. So if we can, the check bolt specifically being so popular and bringing that test point to a safer area to test has really alleviated such a stringent lockout tagout procedure for a lot of people, where it's really helping expedite that. But then at the same time, your equipment's staying cleaner on the inside. It's not getting prodded around. Nothing's getting left inside there accidentally. That's crazy how often that happens.
Yeah.
And it's just a cleaner, safer way to go about the job. So that's all we're trying to do, is wash, rinse, repeat into as many applications. That voltage indicator, we have DC applications where capacitive load stays inside the equipment. And on a friction welder, we had employees that were opening that up a minute later, waiting around for it to dissipate, and they'd still get shocked. And they had no way to tell how long besides that sticker that just said, wait a minute before you open this. So they put on a voltage indicator, and then they could see that there's a hazard there. We should wait 30 more seconds before we open that door, and then it was safe to progress.
Yeah, and that also ties into NFPA 70E as well. So visualizing the release of stored electrical energy. And these devices, they work on AC or DC applications, exactly as you mentioned on a friction welder. I travel internationally as well, so mining is a big industry that I'm focused on in terms of a vertical. One thing to note as well, you're talking about making the lockout tagout procedure easier, more efficient, smarter. One thing to note as well, if you identify any of our products that, off the shelf are kind of, fitting an application, but you'd like to see some variation or some change, The great thing about these solutions is that they're manufactured here in Davenport, Iowa. And those modifications to those products say, neutral, you want a white wire, or you want the ground to be green, yellow, or you want purple. And that's just kind of how you operate in your facility. Reach out to us. We're happy to get something custom configured for you, and still maintain a relatively short lead time. Standard lead time on all of our products are 2 to 3 days. With that custom piece, that can vary.
Yeah, if there's a better fit into your electrical safe work program, that we'd like to make it. The idea is to make a clear, non-confused entry into your lockout tagout where there's no confusion about how to use a product and why. There has been sometimes people come across our products and don't have the conversation with us. So you'll see people that try to use those flashing indicators as part of their absence of voltage. So I can visually see that that's not blinking anymore, so there's no voltage present, I can proceed. That doesn't fit within the realm of absence of voltage testing.
Correct.
So there are some of those, and the non-contact voltage detector pens, we've seen people try to incorporate those. And those, you're not testing for the right things. And that's, again, you need to understand what you're testing for and why, so that you realize that using that non-contact voltage detector pen isn't going to give you the assurance that there is actually no voltage present.
Exactly. And so, sorry, we kind of got a little sidetracked there. Just to recap on the periodic inspections, we also strongly recommend taking a look at the OEM maintenance documentation as well. Just ensuring that you're following the original equipment manufacturer's guidelines as it relates to those periodic inspections, general maintenance that is to be performed, and certainly ensuring that you're doing the proper training and communication as well to your workers on that.
All right. And what is the next violation? It's just having a program, having an electrically safe
energy control program. And so this ties into kind of one of the final buckets here. I believe that there's one more after this. But this kind of made up 265 different violations. And this ultimately ties back into 1910.147 subsection C number 1. The employer shall establish a program consisting of energy control procedures, employee training, and periodic inspections to ensure that before any employee performs any servicing or maintenance on a machine or equipment where the machine or equipment shall be isolated, where the unexpected energizing startup or release of stored energy could occur and cause injury, the machine or equipment shall be isolated from the energy source and rendered inoperative.
So is that just not having it documented? That's when you walk in and you ask for someone's,
Lockout tagout procedure or an energy control procedure, yeah.
And they can only verbalize it to you.
Correct, yeah. So that comes back to kind of having clear, defined documentation that you can scale out to anyone at the company. Again, this can be somebody that's new or been with the company for 30 years and is set to, retire soon. Ultimately, this needs to be a tangible, accessible document that is clearly defined for anyone that is performing work, whether it be a lockout tagout procedure or general maintenance on their equipment.
Yeah, one of the things I've found that helps, although everywhere I've been, this is never anyone's dedicated job, but as part of business continuity, to have some sort of plan that outlines what each role is and how often those things in that role need to be accomplished. Because this sounds like if someone's in task with updating this, creating this documentation, or training people, and they leave your company, that seems like a real easy gap to.
It's a huge gap.
You fill in, they take over the big fires that are burning, but you forget about the going back through updating documents and procedures.
Kind of the nitty gritty details that need to be followed within OSHA and NFPA 70E. And that ties back in nicely to our expert network. But something that I want to just touch on, and this is unfortunate. As I mentioned before, we definitely deal with a very diverse background in our industry and varying degrees of electrical safety. Some folks, they don't really have anything clearly defined or documented. There are other folks that have a policy or program in place, but that periodic inspection and training and communication might be lacking. In accordance to NFPA 70E annually, you should be looking at that. I also recommend doing it more frequently, especially if you're buying and bringing in new equipment, or you have varying degrees of equipment. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when I'm having these discussions, it's unfortunate to hear that folks are reaching out and trying to find better alternatives after an incident has occurred. And that's really disheartening. That's heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. We truly believe that we're saving lives with these products. And on top of that, they're common sense solutions. We don't want you to have to worry about an injury that occurred and then start your process of developing and documenting. And we want you to avoid these violations altogether. We want to ensure that you have a defendable electrical safety program and that you understand and know about the key points that need to be followed within NFPA 70E and OSHA.
Mm-hmm. And again, open forum for questions today. But if there ever is a question about the application or use of one of our products or any other product out there, we work very well with UL, with master electricians all over the world to understand and really move forward with what people are looking for, what are the needs in the industry, and how we can go about making these things safer and smarter. So feel free to reach out. We field those questions wholeheartedly because we want to help ensure that there's no confusion in what you're doing. Because if I had to go access that electrical panel or do any part of electrical industrial maintenance and I wasn't 100% sure or confident in the tool, that we found in our research that people don't like putting down their voltmeter. It makes sense. You're trained for your entire life to trust this device before you stick your arm in something.
Exactly.
So we take that feedback and we try to stay in line with what the industry is asking for and just give tools to make it safer and smarter. So we're not, like Chris said, we're not breaking any new ground or reinventing any wheels. We're just going about ways to eliminate hazards, substitute the hazard.
Engineer, yep.
Yep. So
eliminate.
If there's any questions, I know we wanted to address some verbiage that Terry touched on in his webinar, but we got what was the last?
One more, yeah. We got one more violation that made up the top 5, and that is application of control. So again, this is in OSHA 1910.147, subsection D. The established procedures for the application of energy control, the lockout or tagout procedures shall cover the following elements and actions and shall be done in the following sequence. So ultimately, this is kind of touching on, performing a contact test, visually seeing the release of stored electrical energy, testing each phase conductor, in essence, performing a live-dead live test. And so ultimately, this kind of ties back to what you were saying on low voltage applications. There's a level of comfortability. Certainly folks are coming in and they've done it 1,000 times. And, like I said, corners might be cut. Mm-hmm. And this is where these violations come in, 231. I think all of these correlate nicely together in terms of having a clear and defined electrical safety program, training that is on a regular cadence that is dictated by you and your facility, having conversations with the folks that are performing the work, bottom up, top down.
So we talk about, with our safe test points and like the check bolt, performing a live, dead live. So what that means for anyone that doesn't understand is when you're looking at, say, let's use a check bolt because it has the flashing indication and the test portals. And people's questions were, before we had the flashing indication on there, how do I know that device is working? If I stick my voltmeter on there and it measures nothing, then theoretically, those lines could all just be severed right on the back side of that unit. My common sense response to that is with the check bolt, it's really easy. Look at the device before you use it. Because if it's flashing, those leads are connected and it's source powered. But the
there's redundancy in the device. Yeah, yes, exactly.
The live, dead live was a way to combat that, which is the same thing you're doing with your voltmeter, live, dead live. You're going to go up to our safe test point and you're going to measure it to make sure that it's connected and working before you isolate, before you measure zero, because it's just like any other tool that you're using. You do it with your glove, you do it with your voltmeter. It's your life. It's your hand you're sticking in there. It's your equipment. It's your downtime. It's whatever you want to take credit for. It takes 2 seconds to make sure a product's working, But if you understand what it's there for and what the impact it has is, you can use it appropriately.
And just to add real quick on doing that live, dead live test. So ultimately, you have your meter in front of you, right? So you're actually going to test it to a known voltage source. In conversations with customers, they actually, this is something that I learned. Again, I don't have an electrical background, but I've learned a lot through this industry and gone through a lot of training. Fluke has a portable power that you can actually test your meter to. So testing it to a known voltage source, as Nick mentioned, testing it live at the device, phase to phase, phase to ground, isolating your power, testing it after you've isolated, so phase to phase, phase to ground, and then testing the meter again to that known voltage source to ensure that your meter is calibrated and working correctly.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And we will, at the end of this, I see a whole bunch of chats going through. So I'm excited for the questions. But if anyone hasn't had a check vault land in front of them and wants to try it out, we will, again, be offering anyone to sign up for a sample, to have a conversation with Chris or myself or our team to go over the impact that these can have in your facility and any specific areas that might be of need where you're struggling.
And I just want to ask a quick question to our moderator. Since we have mentioned, I'm throwing a curveball here. Like I said, I'm all over the place. Since we have discussed electrical safety and either helping you do an initial audit and bridge that gap to a clearly defined electrical safety program and having documented in place that is defendable, if there's an area for you to write in expert network, or if you're interested in the expert network and there's not an area for you to write in, just shoot us an email. Shoot me an email. We'll give you a call. We'll shoot a note over to you. As I mentioned before, Terry is an expert in this regard, been on multiple boards. He's been on the NFPA 70E committee, works with CSA Z462 as well up in Canada. So certainly we would love to help you reduce these violations to zero.
And he's got resources. Terry shares resources to help with the documentation, with the labels,
exactly,
with making sure everything's clearly communicated. So if you haven't seen that webinar, it was October. Very useful, even to share around your team, just to help people understand what's in place and why. And then the updates, because there is some verbiage changes. So I know we did want to discuss that. So as these questions roll in, Nick, feel free to read them out to us. But there was a question we were down at Power Gen last week, and someone asked, the point of work was added into some verbiage.
Yep.
So with the Grace products, I know we've always acted as like an extension of that point of work. So we're not moving anything, but we're making the testing area safer. But can you kind of rephrase that into when these questions are posed to like our reps, our distributors, how should they be handling that? And are we legitimately safe in the way that these things are applied and used?
Yeah, so I'm going to address this in two ways. The first is I'm going to specifically talk about how our products comply within the rule. And that is Article 120.6, and that is the process for establishing an electrically safe working condition. Again, I believe that there are about 7 steps and processes that are outlined within NFPA 70E. A couple of those: release of stored electrical energy, performing a contact test. We want you to follow state and local electrical code when installing our solutions into your equipment. The great thing about what Nick mentioned is that these devices are acting as an extension of your source voltage and that point of work. So realistically, because they're permanently mounted and externally installed on the outside of equipment, you're able to use your portable test instrument, as I mentioned, and perform that live, dead live test and comply with the standards that are outlined within the rule of NFPA 70E. I believe it was 2018. This is kind of the alternative method, and both methods are great ways of solving a problem. And that is establishing an electrically safe working condition and ensuring that you've de-energized the equipment. In 2018, they added an exception. That is the exception to the rule. So our product is going to be UL 61010 listed up to 1,000 volts. The exception applies to UL 1436 self-testing devices. So our product is a permanently mounted accessory, and you can quote me on this. This is feedback that we received explicitly from the committee within NFPA 70E, is that they do not prohibit, meaning that our devices, our permanently mounted electrical accessories, are permitted to be used in conjunction with a portable test instrument to perform your lockout tagout and perform that live dead live test, or that live dead live test, forgive me. And so again, it ultimately comes down to preference. I've had a lot of exposure to engineers and electricians that are actually doing the work. And you touched on this earlier.
Yeah,
they don't want to put their meter down.
Yeah, but they
rely very heavily on their meter, their portable test instrument.
Yeah, there's a lot of instances where you don't have a meter available, and there's a lot of solutions that look towards that, which is hopeful, because like if you go in an elevator shaft or somewhere where it's going to take an electrician a long time to show up, those are instances where those automatic testers are recommended, because it can help speed up the process. You can qualify people to use them, but we've stuck with this style because the voltmeter, because people want to measure that, people want to feel comfortable with that device. But there are applications for every device. They're installed differently, they're powered differently, and we need to make sure that we understand how they're operating and what they're doing. But they're meant to help make your job more safe and more efficient and not cause any fear or uncertainty. So if there ever is a question about how this is installing, what it's implying, or the application, feel free to reach out. We don't want to have anyone misled or confused about what they might actually be doing. But it's just 4 leads on the inside of your cabinet. It just extends out those test points so that you don't have to expose a potentially hazardous energy to put your voltmeter up there and test it.
So I think we should just quickly chat on this too. So, I mean, I touched on this already, kind of the difference between the exception that was added versus the rule that's outlined. So this says meet the standard with no exceptions. And I just want to make it very clear that there are 2 avenues to comply with that standard. One is the rule, the other is the exception. And both are great solutions. Both are devices that can assist with lockout, tagout, and absence of voltage testing. It's ultimately just going to come down to how you want to perform that absence of voltage test.
Yeah, and just make sure that no matter what you use, you know how it works and what it's doing.
Exactly.
Because I know there's automatic voltage testers that we have some competitors that make similar products that don't work the way ours do. So you're not testing the same thing, you're not seeing the same results, and it's because we're not making Me Too products. We're both trying to accomplish fill needs in the market. We're going different routes, but they both accomplish that need. But you need to make sure that you're understanding the tool that you're using, and that you're training people on using the tool, and that you're making sure that they're continued to be updated and current with the knowledge on using those tools.
And just one quick note to add to that. So that kind of ties in nicely to these OSHA violations and the overall point of work. So the one thing that I want to stress as well is that these are redundancy tools and troubleshooting tools, and they assist with lockout, tagout, and absence of voltage testing. Regardless of whether or not you use our device or any device on the market, if you are unable to successfully verify a de-energized state, you also will then in turn need to be a qualified electrical worker, trained and able to troubleshoot on the equipment. In essence, you will need to suit up in high-cal PPE and physically go into the equipment to start your troubleshooting process.
All right. Are there any questions that have come in regarding any of this, Nick?
Yes, we've been getting some questions throughout and some general just conversations between attendees. So I will start with the top here. So there's a question about if these does OSHA violation stats specifically address electrical lockout tagout? So every single year, OSHA releases the top 10 violations across, at all areas. Lockout tagout is number 6 this year. So that's just general lockout tagout. And then what we've broken down today are the top 5 violations within the lockout tagout violations. So these are the top ones. So there is also a question about periodic inspection. It is written here in an open letter to OSHA I pulled up during this that periodic inspections should be performed annually.
Which is, I think, what I said, but I also recommended more frequently.
More the merrier.
Yeah, more hands-on training, the better. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but you just don't know somebody's experience. And why risk it when we're talking about safety? Especially when it comes to the potential severity of risks that can occur when you're working on this type of equipment. So yes, at a minimum annually, but certainly in my conversations, I know that there's like weekly roundtables or war room discussions, whatever you want to call it. And then on a monthly basis, there's also kind of a, I've seen facilities come up with like safety committees that.
Oh, I've been on safety committees.
Yeah, not necessarily
my
a
role.
committee that is associated to like NFPA 70E or OSHA, but it's like their own internal safety committee where they kind of hash that out and discuss that.
Actually,
and it ties back into the training as well.
That my experience in the industrial atmosphere was from the emergency response. I was on-site medic and for steel mills, and I always remember the electricians in there were some of the more interesting people I hung out with, but they moved so slow. When they'd get a job, they'd walk down there real calm, and it always reminded me, because we were taught the same thing on the fire department, that you don't run, you don't rush into it, but you walk down there with a calm, level head as you're thinking through your procedure, you're thinking through what you need to do and how to safely accomplish your job. And that mindset really needs to be present.
Yep.
But also the way back up. If you're performing any of that work and you have a lingering doubt, or you haven't been trained in a year, or no one's updating these standards, you need to understand the communication back up the chain to make sure those get addressed. Because again, your company's going to want those things addressed too. Might just be bigger fires, but somebody needs to be able to address that. And not having that clear channel back up the chain is just as destructive to that process as not accomplishing it in the beginning.
Yep.
So if you don't have a channel for your employees to give feedback or to respond to toolbox talk saying, hey, no one found that useful, maybe we readjust how we're portraying that. Or the old days when they just wheel in that video and they hit play and let you sit there for 20 minutes.
Yep.
So they need to be effective trainings, but you need to have open communication with your staff, and you need to not be afraid to say, hey, I don't think this is a safe way to do this, because someone's asking you to go risk your life, essentially. So you need to make sure that you're going about it calm, collected, in a way that you're able to approach confidently.
What other questions do we have?
So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now as we kind of go through these questions, just so people can, if they need to jump off anytime soon, they can go ahead and get their responses in here. So this is just in regard to the check volt sample we had talked about earlier. If you're interested in check volt, check that box right there. If you're interested in the expert network, the electrical safety program training that we offer alongside Terry Becker, check that. We will follow up with you guys. These two might follow up with you guys after the webinar. They love to do that. So I did get another one. So this was an interesting one. So it says, even when a Grace voltage indicator is in place, say for an MCC or VFD, the older guys still test for voltage. So would I. Good habit.
As they should.
Which is, yes, that's a requirement. So yeah, I'll let you guys take that one away.
Yeah, so I think Nick touched on this, but the voltage indicator and some of the non-contact devices that we have are generally used in a mechanical lockout tagout. Mm-hmm. Just general maintenance, working on a belt or drive or something, non-electrical work. And that is a great tool to use in mechanical lockout tagout purposes. Once you kind of step into that electrical work, that is where NFPA 70E comes into play, establishing an electrically safe working condition. And both are good products, but I would challenge you and say, what is the work that is being performed?
A lot of people did want both those capabilities. The flashing indicator was our flagship PESD for a long time. It's the reason why we put it in there. They're the same size. A lot of people have pulled out those flashing indicators to add this ability to be able to use their voltmeter. If that's a situation that you or your customer's in, take that flashing indicator. You can move it to the line side. That's the most common response to that has been you get like a free upgrade of your electrical safety.
Why is it a free upgrade? Why would they move it to the line side?
Well, it adds that quick troubleshooting. You get at a glance when you walk in, you can see the load, you can see the line. If you have any power quality issues, you immediately know where it's coming from or that you're in the right spot. But if you've been in a facility that has these indicators and they're used to the extent to be truly that helpful, it is very hard to go back to a facility that doesn't. And it's very fun to follow those employees around as they go from like paper mill to paper mill and go, oh, there's 1,100 of these at the last place. There's going to be 1,100 of them here too.
Yeah.
Because it just speeds up your day and it makes everyone a little more confident in what they're doing. And as you're walking up, approaching things, you're making that plan in your head and you're getting information on the way there. And that's helpful.
Yep. Sorry, we are providing very long-winded answers, so we will try to keep these shorter so we can get to more questions.
No, you guys are good. Okay, so I have another one here for, I'm not exactly sure what they're asking, so maybe you guys have encountered
Let's
this.
see if we can help.
For a check volt, is there a multiple display option? We typically put the check volt on the box concerned. Customers are asking to be mounted external to the machine by each of the multiple entrance doors.
So if I understand the question correctly, there was something that we configured for our voltage test station. I don't know if we have a visual of that, but for anyone that isn't aware, it leverages our GracePort housing, our panel interface connector housings, with a voltage indicator and a safe test point in that housing. Now, we have had customers, in essence, ask for a box or a separate mounting enclosure that they route conduit from that separate enclosure to the actual application itself. In terms of the check volt, I don't want to say no, but I'm sure that there's probably something that we could do similar to that in regards to what we did for the voltage test station, where in essence it's mounted on a separate enclosure and then it's conduit connected into like your point of work or your source voltage. Mm-hmm. I hope that's the answer to that question.
Well, and
what did you interpret it as?
Well, a lot of those take a little conversation too. So click that check volt box. But we need to make sure that we understand what you're trying to accomplish and how it's being installed and used. But that likely is it doesn't sound like an uncommon thing that we've been asked, because I know we've taken even GracePort Plus and put in multiple of these test points inside of there to hit different locations. So
yeah. And again, that's the great thing about kind of manufacturing here locally in Davenport, Iowa. So I would say check that check volt box and maybe we'll connect with you after the webinar, if that didn't answer your question.
And then I got one that I'll take from you guys here.
Marketing question.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to read directly from code that I did not provide you guys. So just confirming the periodic inspections mentioned is the supervisor performing their responsibility to witness the worker following the correct procedures with the appropriate PPE, right? Okay, so this section, 1910.147C, number 6, requires periodic inspection of the energy control procedure. So the periodic inspection must contain at least 2 components: an inspection of each energy control procedure, and 2, a review of each employee's responsibilities under the energy control procedure being inspected. Each energy control procedure must be separately inspected at least annually to ensure that the energy control program is being properly utilized. At a minimum, these inspections must provide for the demonstration of the procedures and must be performed while authorized employees perform servicing and or maintenance activities on machines or equipment. Specifically, the inspector must be able to determine whether 1, the inspected procedures are adequate, 2, they are understood, and 3, being followed by employees. So following the inspection, there must be a review of each employee's responsibilities under the energy control procedure that was inspected. So I hope that answers that question that you asked there. I don't really have anything else coming in besides that. There was a lot of conversation throughout this webinar, which is good to see. We love that. Do you guys want to talk about the difference, again, one more time, just touch base, wrap up your thoughts on the difference between AVT versus PESD test point or check volt, what are kind of the differences there? There's some discourse about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have my thoughts on it. Again, they're separate devices, and they achieve a goal of verifying a de-energized state and establishing an electrically safe working condition in different ways. NFPA 70E went to market with, a set of rules and guidelines that needed to be followed. Again, the release of electrical stored energy, performing a contact test. Our devices are permanently mounted accessories. They are used in conjunction with a portable test instrument. It is not a self-testing device. It requires a worker, a qualified worker, as outlined within NFPA 70E, to perform that contact test and testing each phase conductor, phase to phase. You can see that here, L1 to L2, L1 to L3, L1 to ground, L2 to ground, L3 to ground. The difference between that solution and an AVT is that an AVT is generally a device that performs that test for you. I think it's usually outfitted with like a button that you press. There's generally some sort of LED that will indicate status.
It's checking for like continuity of the circuit.
It checks for continuity of the circuit.
Battery.
Yeah, and some instances they have a battery. Our device is line voltage powered. There are no external power devices that feed power to this device. On top of that, it's Cat 3 and 4 rated, up to 600 volts, along with a high transient voltage rating as well. So with that Cat 4 rating, realistically, as long as you don't exceed the 1,000 volt threshold that our device is rated for, you pretty much have free reign to install it throughout your facility. And that the category ratings ultimately tie back to that incoming utility power. That's then in turn stepped down to a step down transformer that then is bringing it into a more manageable voltage level for you to use in your facility.
So my feedback has always stayed fairly consistent with these. And the example I use is I know there's two very large customers that use our check volt and an AVT next to each other. And they do so, or one of them uses them next to each other, one of them uses it in various applications. But the various applications, wherever the electricians are slow to get to, the elevator shafts, wherever the mechanical guys live, they're now task trained on that automatic tester because they don't have the tools to perform that. And it was making their job a lot more efficient to get the work done without waiting 40 minutes for someone to show up. That's one of my favorite case studies for this, is that whole elimination of that second person needed. But there's one particular customer where using this and doing live dead live was still in their safety program requiring PPE. So they were able to use an automatic voltage tester to accomplish the live dead live part, but then they still wanted this so they could use their voltmeter to test phase to phase with their own tool. And the combination of those two were sufficient to eliminate the PPE requirement in their safe work program. So there's applications, there's reasons for both, but sometimes they're doing different things, and sometimes putting them side by side is the best option. But it depends on your equipment, your safe work practices, and your local jurisdictions and
state and local.
There is no one size fits all, but it's worth a conversation. And if we can make something you're doing safer, we're happy to have that conversation.
And again, I don't want to sound cliche, but at the end of the day, I truly believe that these types of products, these types of solutions are saving lives.
Yep, everyone goes home.
Everyone comes into the facility and leaves the same way that they come in at the end of the day. I know that sounds cliche, but really this is a big culture shift that is occurring in this industry. Anywhere where there's voltage, anywhere where you're working on live equipment or there's voltage present, more than likely you will see some variation of these devices, whether it be the voltage indicator for visual verifying of the presence of voltage, or any of our combo units, or the check volt, or contact test points. Realistically, I don't imagine this not stopping. I just imagine it continuing to grow and continuing to develop. The great thing about us as well, Grace Technologies, We're always innovating. We're not going to sit here and say that we have the best products in the world, but we will do our best to make your lives easier, safer, and more productive.
It's been a fun place. If you're still with us after this entire hour, we really appreciate it. If you guys want any follow-up on those check bolts, on any of our solutions or services offered, feel free to reach out. Shoot Schultz an email. He loves them. But otherwise, yeah, thank you. We appreciate your time, and hope you have a safe day out there.